Welcome to Another Day Above Ground, a show for, by, and about baby boomers. It's the podcast for people who have no idea how to download a podcast.
Well, my boomer friends, we have got a very special guest this week. What we wanted to do is we wanted to find out, basically what lies ahead in the future. And we were looking for somebody who's got opinions on just about everything. So what we got is a guy who has, I believe, 6 New York Times bestseller books. He is a regular commentator on Fox News, used to have his own TV show. He's a member of the Professional Speaker Hall of Fame, and a personal friend of mine, Larry Winget, joining us from Scottsdale, Arizona. How you doing today, Larry?
Always good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. And to do this show, for those of you listening in, I can't do it just me and Larry. We're going to do it with Tim and Carolyn also, and they're on here. Do you guys have any questions? Larry, I have a question right off the bat. And that is, Tim and I, our backgrounds are in comedy, and pretty much political correctness has killed comedy. I mean, especially in colleges. A lot of comics aren't playing colleges because you have to be politically correct. And I know you have some thoughts on political correctness.
The best thing I've seen about political correctness was an article by Peggy Noonan just a couple of days after the New Year's. Did you see it?
I know Peggy Noonan, yeah.
Well, she wrote this great article about how Warren Zevon and, his famous line about enjoy every sandwich, but she ended the whole thing that said the past decade, I'm going to read it to you. The past decade saw a rise to the woke progressive who dictates the words that can be said and the ideas that can be held, poisoning and paralyzing American humor, drama, entertainment, culture, and journalism. Absolutely right. The most castrating thing that ever happened to our society is political correctness.
Thank God for Ricky Gervais.
Even people who don't like Ricky Gervais go, he's my new hero.
And well, how do we fight back against the political correctness? I mean,
Here's the problem. They can call you names and they can do whatever they want to and call you another great line from Miss Noonan thing was she was going through, you're a racist, a homophobe, a transphobic, a bigot, a villain, and a white male. There you go.
White straight male. Actually, a cis
white male these days, and you're the same as a racist and a homophobe and all that other stuff. And I think there's nothing we can do. If you defend yourself, you're just guiltier in their eyes.
So I think it's our job to defend you. I think that's what's actually happening. I think women have to get on board to the fact that you guys are incredibly valuable. You bring incredible insight and wisdom and strength and power, and your having power does not take power away from us. There's supposed to be a balance here. So I think if more women step up and not defend you guys don't need defending, but stand up for you. We're so busy, pounding our chests about, standing up for us. We've forgotten about you guys who help make life so good for us.
Yeah, but the problem is most women don't even think that.
Hold on. Tim, you go first, and then Larry, you go.
Yeah, most women don't even think the Three Stooges are funny. So how do you get past that barrier?
That's a lack of education from your parents. Because they are funny.
I really do believe men in general are in trouble, and I'm glad you said that about standing up for us. We obviously aren't allowed to stand up for ourselves because that makes it worse. So when other people come to our rescue, not that we need to be rescued, but when they do, I think that helps. When you look at the stats about men, I really feel sorry for guys. I do a podcast called the Real Man Podcast, and the thing about men, we have 3 times the suicide rate women do. 3 times more men kill themselves than women. It's not easy to be a white male, straight male in America today.
That might indicate that women are the carrier.
And where did it all go wrong? How did we lose control? What happened? You know, it used to be where the man of the family was the man of the family, and now he's just the baby daddy. You know,
It's around the time that America's home video, funniest home videos debuted. It was right about the time that that America realized that there's nothing funnier than a man getting hit in the crotch.
Well,
that's
that
the
can be
truth.
funny, but that's not what I'm saying. Depends on the man.
But I mean, about that time, everything kind of changed. You guys are right. It's around that time all the commercials were the stupid dad being informed by the kids, and all the the sitcoms was the stupid husband being set straight by a nanny called Fran.
So we're in this rut, and Larry, you brought up a good point to me the other day. Is that we're not relevant anymore. We're pale, male, and stales, and nobody wants to listen to us anymore.
Yeah, we used to in our industry, Dale. We used to see associations and people, corporate audiences who would hire us because we were smart and our content was good, and somehow our brains left us instantly upon turning 60 years old. And we no longer are considered smart and relevant, and we don't matter any longer. And the new phrase, okay, boomer,
we did a whole episode on that, Larry.
And you know how boomer I am. That should be spelled okay, comma, boomer. But you never see it that way.
But that might have something to do with the assumption of where, as men, our brains are considered to be, because once that stopped work, the place where the brains were stored stopped working. The brains followed.
Yeah,
you got to speak for yourself on that deal. My brain works, just not as often.
And they make little blue pills for your brains, and they don't do that for us. So.
Yes, they do, as a matter of fact. They now have Viagra for women.
What are
If
those?
a woman needs Viagra, she's hanging out with the wrong man. That's all I'm saying.
Why, no, honey. These are my smart pills.
But no, I think this is a tragedy what's happening. I've been teaching the differences between men and women and speaking on that for years and years. And it used to be a partnership. And what happened was when women, this whole feminist movement happened in the 70s and the 80s, and women were, demanding equal pay, which I think we should get equal pay for equal work. That's like a no-brainer. But for us to have it instead of you, it should not be an either or. But women went out, and now we're totally independent. I mean, I live by myself. I pay all of my own bills. Nobody supports me. And so the whole thing comes down to, okay, so what do we need you for? And that's kind of where society has gone. Like, what do we need you for? I have a whole list of what I need you guys for, but most women aren't thinking that anymore. And there's no role models really in the marketplace talking about how amazing men are, especially men with all the wisdom that you guys have gleaned over these years.
I think the whole thing fell apart when women started wearing suits and ties. No, seriously.
And men started wearing Speedos.
Many years ago when I was at AT&T, do you remember corporate women started wearing suits and ties?
Yes.
That's right.
And they stopped wearing dresses, and women tried to become men instead of us. Women need to honor their femininity, and men need to embrace their masculinity. And I don't have to give up mine for you to have yours.
It's
yes.
I think Dave Barry said it best, though, is that women started wearing suits, but they would wear them with like bow ties, so we knew they weren't really serious.
No, actually, but women had to go into the workplace. If you think about, go back to that, Larry, back in the 70s and 80s, women had to wear suits because there were no role models for female leadership in business. it didn't exist. So the only role models we had were the men who were successful in business. So the women had to go and be that. But the balance of femininity and masculinity, you're absolutely right. Women should be feminine. And there's real power in femininity if we respect the power of the masculine as well.
But now masculinity is called toxic. We have toxic masculinity. We don't ever talk about toxic femininity. You know, I just recently did a story on Fox News where they wanted me to talk about toxic masculinity. And I said, let's just talk about toxicity, because that's really the problem, is toxicity. And we're expecting people to apologize for their race, their gender, and their age. Those are the three things we didn't have a choice at one point. Now we do get to choose gender, but we didn't used to. But I just am at the point, I just refuse to apologize for those three things. I am old, white, and male. That's the way it is. And I can't do anything about it, so I don't apologize for it.
In this culture, for some reason, we don't honor the old people. Like in China, they respect the elders, and in a lot of different cultures, they respect the elders. But over here, we just view them as a drain on society by sucking all the money out of Social Security, and and that's
we're the ones who paid into it.
That's
exactly.
right.
Well, look what we just saw. We just saw a 16-year-old girl walking around the country telling us all how we should live.
Yeah, and getting a Nobel Peace Prize for it. So, you got that happening. Time Person of the Year. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to know why we don't honor elders. I mean, we have speaker friends, Larry, who are now working in China because they respect old white guys for some reason, because they like the wisdom of the elders.
I talked to Tommy Hopkins the other day, and he's incredibly busy. He lives here in Scottsdale too, and he's incredibly busy in China. He and Dennis Waitley, who's got to be 1 million years old now. Those guys are busy over there.
Wow.
I actually heard that it's a popular gig in China for old white guys to go and for actors to go and pose as CEOs, because a Chinese company with a old white CEO has more respect than one run by a young Chinese person. So they actually will hire old white guys to pose as the CEO. Yeah, it sounded like a perfect gig for a Seinfeld episode.
Yeah, I was going to say perfect sitcom episode. Exactly. Exactly. So what do you think we have to look forward to, Larry, as old guys? I mean, where's it going from now? Do we just sit around, wait to die, or what do you think?
I think the worst thing we can do is try to stay relevant.
What? Okay, explain.
I've got buddies, and I won't bring up all their names, but they talk about what they're most afraid of is losing their relevance. The problem is relevance has become equated to compromise. Look at Joe Biden, who has decided to be relevant to millennial voters. And he compromised everything he stood for 30 years ago. And so we compromise our values and our beliefs and the basis of who we really are simply to appeal to an audience we don't need to be bothering with. They're never going to be our audience, no matter how much we try to be relevant and compromise to appeal to them. They're not going to be our audience. So just stop. I realize at this point in my career, I'm appealing to tire guys and blue-collar guys. They're still run by old white guys, those kind of associations. I know who my audience is. I'm not the right guy for everybody. And it just looks desperate. You look like one of those guys who ends up with maroon hair.
Well, actually, there's sometimes it's almost embarrassing. I mean, there's no way you can talk like a young person, and you shouldn't even try. Elizabeth Warren just did something. She I forget exactly what the situation of the question, but she said, "If I were you, I would dump that guy who ghosted you," trying to sound really hip and relevant. Of course, if you know what ghosting is, it's impossible to dump the guy who ghosted you already dumped you, and you don't know where to find him. So, I mean, but But here she is trying to sound hip by saying, "Hey, that dude that ghosted you, you should give him an LOL, man."
If you ever find him, you should dump him.
I don't worry about becoming irrelevant. I worry about becoming incontinent. That's a much bigger worry for me. You're irrelevant. You're not wearing diapers. That's all I got to say. But it said, I was reading a story here that 1 in 5 adults in their 60s said they've not given any advice to anybody in the last year. Nobody wants to hear from them. They say,
No, they're just not hanging out in the right places with the right people. I think one of the things that us boomers need to do is get out and find something we're interested in, hang out with the people who are there. I have friends in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, 80s, 60s, sure. But I find them really interesting. And the more interested you are, the more interesting you become. And then they want to talk to you.
But
Larry, you hang out in circles with people, tons of people, maybe a little more conservative than I tend to hang out in, but they're all different ages and they want to hear from you because you're interested in them.
I've never let someone being interested in my opinion stop me from giving it.
Yeah, but I think we isolate ourselves also with people of our own age. I can tell you, we know a lot of what we think because we all grew up thinking the same thing. When I hang out with I hung out with a 32-year-old woman who's like really changing the world with her work. In little ways. She's 32 years old. She could be my kid. God, she's interesting. And I had a coaching session with her yesterday where I think I learned more than she did. It was amazing.
So you're saying to hang out with younger people. What if the judge told you not to do that?
Stay away from the schools, Dale.
How are you going to learn?
Sell your white pants.
Get a van with windows. They're much safer.
I think one of the things that we got to stop doing as boomers is making fun of millennials. And I get called a lot to appear and do stories about millennials. But what I'm always quick to point out is that 34% of millennials live with their parents, which means 66% live on their own and do pretty good. It's a small percentage that gives everybody a bad name. And it's a small percentage of boomers boomers got nothing to brag about either when it comes to some of the stuff we make fun of millennials. Millennials save more money than boomers. Remember, 68% of boomers still support their kids financially. That's their own fault. They need to take a good hard look at themselves before they start making fun of another generation. I think that's why they get tired of us. That's why they're saying, okay, boomer. It's because all we do is trash millennials.
Do you hear that, gang?
No
more making fun of millennials. That means we're going to be a 10-minute show from here on out.
I was going to say it's been a nice podcast. Thanks for playing, you guys. It was a nice run. We had fun. Thanks, Larry.
You just got to be more articulate about the percentages you're talking about. Some of them deserve all the crap we put on them. But there's a whole bunch of them, just like you pointed out, the 32-year-old friend of yours who's doing great work. Well, let's give them credit for that.
I just read an interesting article about Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, running for president, is that the hope was that his youth would appeal to millennials. But apparently millennials are not supporting him at all. They think he's a dork. And they're far more likely to support Warren or Sanders, which I think is really interesting because millennials, when we were growing up, we were told not to trust anyone over 30. And now it seems millennials only trust people over 30. It's like, no, we don't want a millennial president. Are you kidding me? We don't want one of us running the country. We want the old people.
They know who they are. They don't want us. They don't want to be in charge.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. But when we were that age, I don't know, were we I guess we're as politically active as they are today, but it seems what I'm seeing is all these protests. It's the same as it was in the '70s. Bunch of kids who really didn't have much else to do, and they're out on the street protesting whatever happens to be good. I can't believe that people are protesting, killing Soleimani or whatever his name was.
Yeah, 1% of the people marching are there because they actually have a cause they're getting behind. The other 99 are looking for a hookup.
And now we let them out of school. We give them an excused day off from school to go protest. I want them to test out. What's the protest about? What is your belief? How are you going to contribute? What did you learn after the protest? You got to do a book report. Make it a protest.
That is a great idea.
Yeah, it's and people are shocked. Can you believe the millions of kids that walked out of school that day? Yes. Because you told millions of kids that they would be praised if they walked out of school. It's like, oh, really? I'm going to get congratulated for skipping?
But here's the problem now that these people are doing these protests, and they're not. It's not making any difference. It's not moving the needle. When the Vietnam War was protested, I mean, I was a little too young to protest the Vietnam War, but you guys may remember some of those protests.
I was too young to remember the Vietnam
hearing
War.
about them.
My memory left when I turned 60. I don't know.
Those actually made a difference. These aren't
look it up on
mattering.
the Google machine.
The Google machine.
I can't get the scent of tear gas out of my nose to this day.
Yeah, I mean, things like Woodstock, we still talk about it because it mattered to us. These protests, they're here one day, they're gone the next. There's no way really. I'm finding it so hard with this social media thing. I'd love your take on this, Larry, with the noise that's in social media and the untruths versus the truths that are happening. How can anybody be heard?
Well, I'm so tired of the meanness of social media, the meanness. I had 40,000 followers on Twitter, and I just said, I can't take it. I just left Twitter. And now I'm leaving LinkedIn. And hell, I got 2 death threats last week. Seriously, 2 death threats last week over just having an appearance on Fox News talking about almost nothing. And
on LinkedIn?
No, they were direct emails to me.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Because I'm saying, boy, that's a better offer than I ever got on LinkedIn.
I was going to say, usually your death threats come from your wife, so this is unusual.
We've just become mean, and social media is the easiest way to be mean these days.
Yeah, because it's anonymous. Because people aren't seeing you. It's not brave to say that somebody's horrible behind their back, but go ahead and say it to their face. I mean, that's the challenge that we're having, is that people, and everybody has an opinion, and like they say about opinions, everybody has one, and who do we listen to? And I think it's you guys who have the wisdom, back to, circling back. It's you guys who've been on the planet for 60 years and have been through so much and can share the wisdom, but how do we get heard?
Well, as my father used to say, do as I say, not as I do. So,
My dad said the same thing.
The problem for old guys like us is that we just get tired of beating our head against the wall and we go, to heck with it, give up.
Yeah.
And we just check out like I did on Twitter. I'm not fighting with anybody anymore. I'm just tapping out. And that's the downside for guys who still have a lot to contribute. At some point, we just go, I'm tapping out. I'm going to leave it to you guys. And all we do is show up and vote. They don't. They just protest and complain. We actually show up and vote because that's about all we can do anymore. Otherwise, we really are irrelevant to them.
Well, before you leave Twitter, one favor to ask, if you could plug this podcast, Another Day Above Ground. We could certainly, we're close to double-digit listenership now, and we're looking to go over the edge. So
our listener needs some company.
I can get you one more. I know I can.
Okay.
All right. Anyhow, Larry Winget, thank you so very much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts amongst baby boomers. We hope that we can touch base with you again in the future when other big news comes up that you are always have a thought about. Any way, would you like people to get in touch with you, or would you just like them to forget about it?
If they'll just spend money with me, I'll be happy. So
There you
just
go.
go out and buy anything that says Larry Winget on it.
It's about 1/3 of the books in the bookstore, so you got a pretty good choice.
Just funding my burden habit. That's all I'm looking for.
And a couple real nice engraved watches too, I might add.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been fun.
Thank you very much. Larry Winget, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Larry.
And that's it for another day above ground. For Dale, Tim, and Carolyn, I'm Farad Muhammad. Thanks for listening.